So I wanted to share a interesting experience I had while in grad school when I was enrolled at the Bologna Center in Italy. And it's one of those great stories where it brings in all the elements of being me surrounded by a bunch of, in my eyes, foreigners, but they're just from all the different parts of the globe. And we took this course with a professor called Professor Sergei Radchenko. Um, if you're interested in Russia, China, the Cold War, or what's going on in Ukraine right now, he's a great guy to follow. He just had an article released in Foreign Affairs that went in depth on the peace process that almost was at the very beginning of the invasion of Ukraine. And why it didn't come to fruition and what was going on there. So that's some great work he does. But we took a I took a course on China with him. He's Chinese, Russo Chinese born. And one of my favorite courses I took with him was a debate course, which was like 30 to 40 people each week. Two people would debate on each side. And you didn't get to pick which side you debate. You were pre selected by a like coin toss who's on which side. So it's very luck of the draw. It's very interesting, forces a lot of people to argue positions they don't agree with. And the first debate I had was about U.S. foreign, and by the way, the course was about U.S. foreign policy towards different regions of the world. And the first one I did was about U.S. containment of China. Um, and but my favorite debate was the second one. And the second debate, this is debate number two. The prompt is the US should abandon its empire in quotation marks, and concentrate on domestic problems, end prompt. And I was put on the, I guess, um, against position. So my side was saying the American empire is good. The U.S. should not abandon its quote unquote empire and concentrate on domestic problems, while the opposing side had to argue that the U.S. should abandon its empire and concentrate on domestic problems. Now, this being a liberal program, most people err on that side, that American imperialism is a bad thing and people should pull back on that. And that, of course, we have domestic issues. We need to, I think people on the right and left both think that. But what was interesting was who I was paired with. So it was a good friend of mine. His name's Leon, and he's from China. He's from Beijing, and he used to be a bartender there. He's a great bartender still. I love going to his place because he makes everyone the greatest cocktails you'll ever have. But he is very ideologically different than me. I am in almost anarcho-capitalist in the utopian sense. If I wanted utopia, that's what the utopia I would want. Um, and he's much more strong state, East Asian development models that are more socialist in nature. But he had to argue for the benefits of the American empire with me. So it was really fascinating. We had very different views, and it was kind of like two whole different arguments on our side. But then we were debating a Frenchman and a girl from America who had just come out of undergrad from like Davidson or one of those schools. And so the following is I was going back through some of my documents and I found my opening statement. And just as a warning, the opening statement, the rebuttal, the refutation by the Frenchman had him very quickly in the first few sentences say, "Your views are abhorrent." And I kind of liked that because it felt like I got under his skin in a way where he was doing ad hominem attacks. You know, if you can't refute what my arguments are, then yeah. So this will be interesting. This is me recreating just exactly how I wrote it a year or two ago, and we'll see how this goes. I hope you enjoy. Good evening, Professor Radchenko, fellow classmates, and welcome to tonight's debate. To begin this evening, I want to clarify the premise of tonight's discussion and subsequently introduce our argument for the preservation of the American empire. From there, you will hear my colleague Leon detail the economic and political consequences of adopting the costly, erroneous, and misguided policies proposed by the opposition. So what is the premise we'll be discussing tonight? You will hear the opposition argue that the U.S. should abandon its empire and concentrate on domestic problems. The adoption of such a policy would be unnecessary given the realities of the home front, inappropriate given the international environment, and foolish given the historical role of said empire. Leon and I advocate for the preservation of the American empire on three basic principles. First, we would like to note that America has always been an imperial power. Second, and most importantly, we'd like to emphasize the benefits brought to America and her allies through its imperial role. Lastly, as we would not want to simply disregard the opposition's proposal, we would like to advise a more sensible, productive, and strategic path forward for the empire. Now, I see the past as prologue, so let me take a moment to reflect on the first point and provide some historical context. From its very inception, the U.S. demonstrated its imperial capacity and aspirations, quickly enacting policies in the Americas to achieve its own sphere of influence and control. Although Washington warned against foreign entanglements, particularly European, we can clearly see that American policy in the early period was heavily informed by the global environment, specifically its response to the new age of European imperialism in the mid to late 1800s. First and foremost, Washington understood that the interests of the New World were drastically different than that of the Old, and provided new opportunities in governance, economics, and military control. As such, the American empire would be vastly different from that of the Old. Let me explain. From a federation of colonies with divergent histories and interests, to the opportunistic acquisition of the Louisiana Purchase from Napoleon, to the integration of Texas upon its liberation from Mexico, to the subsequent wars against Mexico for the states now comprising the northern border of the Rio Grande, to the colonization and habitation of the West Coast, and the purchase of Alaska from the Russians, and the acquisition of the Hawaiian Islands. The U.S. was driven by policies informed by the Monroe Doctrine. With every new acquisition, the U.S. secured and expanded its strategic independence, serving the dual purpose of kicking the Europeans out of the Americas and ensuring economic ties to the East and the West. American imperialism was a pragmatic process driven by opportunity, capacity, and capability. By the early 1900s, the U.S. had firmly secured an empire based on the Monroe Doctrine. However, 1914 and the subsequent years of struggle in the Old World would change the rationale, objectives, and basis for the American empire. While the first half of the American imperialist experiment embodied the principle of strategic independence, the realities of the Industrial Revolution required a rethinking of U.S. relations with the Old World. Embodied in a variety of speeches, in particular the 14 points, Woodrow Wilson set the template for the American empire in the 20th century. All subsequent administrations and their foreign policy reflects the three rationales for empire, now often colloquially known as Wilsonianisms. Wilson saw a new world order built on three freedoms: free trade, free peoples, free states. Free trade, including the open navigation of the seas, would ensure the continued prosperity provided by capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. Representative governance, in the form of liberal democracy, would free the citizens of the Old World from the dominion of their own state. Alternatively, freedom of the state, in the form of sovereignty recognized via international institutions such as the League of Nations, would prevent domination of states by other states and/or empires. As with all human endeavors, progress is not always forward. The U.S. failed in its mission both during the peace negotiations in France and the subsequent interwar period. Domestic calls for isolationism led to a drastic inward turn during the interwar period, as imperialist policies were abandoned in order to concentrate on the aftermath of domestic issues such as the Great Depression. Unsuccessful in easing the economic hardships throughout the 1930s, the U.S. federal government did not choose but was called to act as the Third Reich and the Japanese Empire marched for first regional, then global dominance. By the end of the war, America stood astride the world like a colossus, comprising over 50% of global output and being isolated from the the destruction wrought on most homelands of the participants, the U.S. entered an era I'd like to describe as the empire from necessity. In order to rebuild the world, provide for the dispossessed, ensure the safety from despots and dictators, and most importantly, confront an ideological and economic system that's incompatible with the American way, the U.S. turned to the Wilsonian playbook and did what we failed to do in 1918. The subsequent world order is often referred to as the Great Peace or the Pax Americana. During this period, the U.S. faced down a nuclear-armed adversary without condemning the world to Armageddon. The U.S. rebuilt Europe into a peaceful continent dominated by liberal democracies, opened the great empire of China to the capitalist system, lifting 300 to 400 million individuals out of poverty, paved the way for a new wave of globalization that continues to break all the UN estimates for statistics regarding combating global poverty. But there is still much work to be done. The shared security, the common market, the political congruency of the American empire benefit the American citizens and our allies. The U.S. is not perfect, but the American empire has been a force for good on the stage since 1945. Now, I am sure the opposition will fiercely debate these conclusions, and I'll be happy to expand on my position during the next 2 hours, but I cannot go without mentioning the current situation in Europe. Ukraine was the victim of a flagrant and calculated aggression for its decision to turn towards the West. For those in the path of dictators with their liberty at stake can see the best that the long-term security provided by the American empire, the economic prosperity of the common market, and the political flexibility within are admirable, preferable, and the way of the future. We are called to reaffirm our commitment to the empire, and I believe the U.S. will answer that call. However, I hope it's not too late. Lastly, I want to provide a counter-proposal for the next phase of American imperialism, and I will expand on these points during our discussion. First, the U.S. must provide equity financing, foreign military alliances, and promote representative political institutions in Africa. By 2050, Africa will have a greater labor pool than that of India and China combined. They are skipping generations of technology and inventing new modes of development in an ever-changing world. Second, the U.S. must reaffirm its commitment to its allies in Asia in an effort to counter and compete with the rise of China and the shift to a bipolar world. Third, and a critical component of our argument, the U.S. federal government should focus on what it does best and leave domestic issues to the states. One of the greatest strengths of the American system is our layers of governance. This should be leveraged in order to appropriately allocate public interest of the citizens to the states, public interest of the states to the federal government, in accordance with our Constitution. This last point cannot be emphasized enough. To conclude, imperial power comes with responsibility. Abandoning these responsibilities would constitute a dark turn for American foreign policy and a regressive move against the values we hold dear. Liberty in life, liberty in the market, liberty in politics. Thank you for listening, and I'd be happy to answer any questions on the points raised. Now, I will turn my mic over to Leon, who will bring his own distinct view for the preservation of the American empire. Thank you. I squeeze